March 12, 1944. Byron Hot Springs Resort, California. Corporal Kenji Watanabe's consciousness returned in fragments. The first sensation was softness beneath his body, an impossibility that contradicted his last clear memory. American bombers screaming overhead, the supply depot exploding in cascades of fire, Colonel Ishikawa's voice blaming him for failures that had everything to do with systematic theft and nothing to do with enemy action. He opened his eyes to white ceiling plaster, unmarred and clean. Someone had treated his injuries. Someone had changed him into clean cotton pajamas that smelled faintly of soap. This must be the end, he thought. The Americans would make him comfortable before execution, let him taste hope before extinguishing it. It was the only explanation that made sense. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The door opened. A man entered wearing an American uniform and a face that could have belonged to Watanabe's cousin in Osaka. The cognitive dissonance was immediate and profound. "Good morning, Corporal Watanabe," the man said in perfect Tokyo dialect. "My name is Sergeant Tommy Nakayama. I'm here to help you understand where you are." Watanabe stared, unable to reconcile Japanese features with American insignia. "Your Nisei?" "I am," Nakayama replied, something flickering in his eyes before professional neutrality reasserted itself. "You're at a military facility in California. You were rescued from the water after the bombing. You've been unconscious for 3 days. Rescued, not captured. Both, I suppose." Nakayama sat carefully. "You're a prisoner of war, Corporal. But your treatment here differs from what you might expect. There are 17 other Japanese prisoners currently housed here." Watanabe's mind raced, searching for the trap. Why the comfortable room? Why treat my injuries? Because that's what we do. Commander Whitmore, who runs this facility, believes treating people with dignity produces better outcomes than the alternative. The words contradicted every piece of propaganda Watanabe had absorbed. Americans were supposed to be brutal, savage. This gentle explanation, this clean room, this careful treatment, it felt like an elaborate psychological trap. At 6 o'clock, Nakayama led him to dinner. 17 other Japanese prisoners sat eating in near-complete silence, their faces reflecting the same confusion Watanabe felt. The food was an attempt at Japanese cuisine, but something was fundamentally wrong about the proportions, the combinations, the essence. Across the room, an older man watched him with particular intensity. Even in civilian clothes, his military bearing was evident. Their eyes met, and Watanabe saw judgment and contempt. He understood immediately that whatever hierarchies existed among the prisoners, he had just been evaluated and ranked at the bottom. After the meal, Nakayama approached quietly. That was Lieutenant Hiroshi Tanaka, former naval officer. He's become the de facto leader among prisoners. Very traditional, very concerned with honor. "He thinks I'm a disgrace," Watanabe said flatly. "He thinks all of you are disgraced by capture. But yes, he has particular contempt for non-combat personnel." The words stung because they echoed Ishikawa's dismissive attitude. Back in his room, Watanabe lay staring at the ceiling, trying to process everything. The comfort contradicted expectations, but Lieutenant Tanaka's contempt resonated with familiar fear. Sleep brought dreams of the depot, of Ishikawa standing over rotting food while premium goods disappeared into black market channels, of trying to explain with a voice that produced no sound. He woke in darkness with the certainty that his old life had ended in fire and water. What came next remained to be seen. 3 days of careful routine established a deceptive normalcy. Watanabe woke at dawn, dressed, and made his way to meals with other prisoners who maintained their silence. Lieutenant Tanaka presided over this wordless community, his disapproval a constant presence requiring no verbal expression. The meals continued in their strange hybrid style, American interpretations of Japanese food that captured form but missed spirit. Each meal was a small assault on Watanabe's trained sensibilities, but he ate in silence like everyone else. On the morning of his 4th day, unusual activity suggested something different was planned. Extra tables were being set up. The kitchen staff seemed particularly busy. That afternoon, whispers finally broke the prisoner's silence. Something was coming. Lieutenant Tanaka's sharp looks restored quiet, but tension hung in the air. Dinner arrived an hour late. When prisoners assembled, American guards looked oddly uncertain. The regular meal was served first, then Private Eddie Sullivan emerged from the kitchen carrying a tray of steaming bowls. Behind him came Nakayama, his expression carefully neutral. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Gentlemen, Nakayama announced in Japanese, Private Sullivan has prepared a special dessert. It's his attempt to provide comfort food, something familiar from home. The bowls were distributed. Watanabe stared at his portion with growing incomprehension. Rice swimming in sweetened milk. Raisins scattered throughout. The entire concoction dusted with cinnamon. It contradicted every principle of Japanese rice preparation he'd ever learned. Lieutenant Tanaka spoke first, his voice sharp with offended dignity. What is this? This is not Japanese food. This is an insult. Sullivan looked stricken, his pride deflating visibly. Other prisoners, following Tanaka's lead, pushed their bowls away in unified refusal. But young Seaman Kimura, perhaps too curious to resist, took a small bite. His face transformed into profound confusion and distaste. He tried not to react, but his throat worked visibly as he forced himself to swallow. The sound that escaped Watanabe was involuntary, a sharp intake of breath. His craftsman's instincts had been screaming since the bowls appeared. The rice was overcooked to mushiness. The sweetness was excessive and aggressive. The cinnamon was alien. The raisins had no place in any Japanese rice dish ever conceived. It was fundamentally, comprehensively, almost magnificently wrong. Sullivan asked through Nakayama, "What's wrong with it?" I followed the recipe exactly. Before conscious thought could intervene, Watanabe found himself speaking. The rice is overcooked. You've treated it like Italian rice. Japanese rice should maintain grain structure even for dessert, which this is not. Every eye turned toward him. Tanaka's gaze carried a warning like physical pressure. But the words continued, pulled by compulsion he didn't fully understand. The milk is wrong. We don't cook rice and milk for dessert. And cinnamon is a Western spice. It has no place in Japanese rice preparation. The raisins, why raisins? This is 3 different cuisines fighting in one bowl. It shows effort, but no understanding. No harmony. No respect for ingredients or tradition. The silence was absolute. Then Lieutenant Tanaka spoke, his voice low and dangerous. Corporal Watanabe, you forget yourself. But Sullivan was speaking urgently to Nakayama. The translation came quickly. Private Sullivan wants to know if you could show him the proper way. He genuinely wants to understand. Watanabe looked at Sullivan's earnest face, saw genuine distress at having failed in his attempt at kindness. One lesson, he heard himself say. I could show him the basics. How to prepare rice properly. How to make dashi. Just the fundamentals. As Nakayama translated, Watanabe finally met Lieutenant Tanaka's gaze. What he saw was exactly what he expected, contempt mixed with something that might have been pity. By speaking, by offering to teach, Watanabe had crossed the line from prisoner to collaborator. That night, lying in bed, Watanabe tried to understand what he had done. His hands flexed unconsciously, remembering proper knife work, fresh ingredients, the satisfaction of creating beauty from raw materials. Teaching Sullivan would mean using those hands again for their true purpose. But it would also mean cooperation with the enemy. Perhaps teaching proper technique was preservation rather than betrayal, he thought. Perhaps there was honor in maintaining traditions even if students were enemies. The rationalizations felt weak, but they were all he had to bridge the gap between craftsman's integrity and prisoner's shame. Behind one-way glass, Captain Margaret Chun reviewed her notes with methodical precision. Watching Corporal Watanabe break his silence, driven by professional pride to critique Sullivan's catastrophic rice pudding, had confirmed her assessment of the prisoner's psychological vulnerabilities. That was unexpected, Commander James Whitmore said, arms crossed. I thought you said it would take weeks to get any of them talking. I said weeks using conventional approaches, Chun corrected. Corporal Watanabe is different. His file indicated culinary training. When confronted with violations of his craft, his professional identity overrode his resistance. So he complained about rice pudding. How does that help us win the war? Chun met his skeptical gaze calmly. Watanabe didn't just complain. He explained cultural significance, mentioned specific techniques and ingredients. That kind of detailed knowledge could provide intelligence about supply chains, regional customs, and dietary conditions of Japanese forces. That's a stretch, Captain. Is it? Chin extracted analysis pages. Watanabe mentioned sweet rice wine, specific preparation methods, seasonal considerations. These details suggest high-level training, probably kaiseki cuisine. That means particular socioeconomic background, access to premium ingredients before the war. If we get him talking about how cooking has changed, what substitutions the military makes, what's no longer available, we build a picture of Japanese supply limitations. Whitmore watched prisoners disperse below. Watanabe walked alone, notably isolated. You want me to authorize cooking lessons? You want facility resources dedicated to teaching one of our privates how to make better rice? I want you to authorize a cultural exchange program that yields intelligence about Japanese logistics while reducing prisoners' psychological stress and increasing cooperation willingness. The cooking is just the vehicle. Whitmore had lost his ship at Pearl Harbor. He wanted to believe harsh treatment was justified, but he was intelligent enough to recognize when emotional preferences conflicted with operational effectiveness. How would this work? Chen had prepared for this moment. We start small. One lesson to improve prisoner morale. Sullivan as student. He genuinely tried and failed. Nakayama translates. We position Mrs. Yamada as cultural consultant to ensure authenticity. Mrs. Yamada is an intelligence analyst, not a cooking instructor. The prisoners don't know that. To them, she's a sympathetic elder validating their cultural knowledge. Her presence makes Watanabe comfortable while providing real-time analysis. And when other prisoners realize Watanabe is cooperating, social isolation makes him more dependent on relationships with his interrogators. Sullivan's enthusiasm provides validation his fellow prisoners deny. We're not just gathering intelligence, Commander. We're building an environment where cooperation feels like restoration rather than betrayal. The silence carried ethical weight neither wanted to acknowledge. Dr. Weinstein would document this moment, Chen knew. The psychologist was already troubled by the operation's manipulative nature. But they were at war. Chen had learned that watching her family's restaurant empty after Pearl Harbor had internalized it when news arrived about extended family in Nanking. The Japanese military had shown no mercy to Chinese civilians. Why should she extend mercy to Japanese soldiers? Except Corporal Watanabe didn't look like an instrument of atrocity. He looked like a conscripted man forced from work he loved, betrayed by corrupt superiors. Chen pushed that thought away. Empathy was useful for understanding vulnerabilities, but couldn't compromise objectives. One lesson, Whitmore said finally. If it produces nothing useful, we try something else. Meanwhile, Lieutenant Tanaka was conducting his own operation. He stood with 3 prisoners and spoke in controlled tones. Corporal Watanabe has revealed himself. He cannot be trusted. He will cooperate, provide whatever they want, under pretense of preserving culture. But there is no culture in collaboration. There is only shame. One prisoner ventured. What if he truly believes he's preserving something valuable? Tanaka's gaze could have frozen water. Resistance is silence. Resistance is refusal. Watanabe has chosen collaboration over honor. The consequences are clear: isolation. No one speaks to him. No one acknowledges his presence. Seaman Kimura, listening nearby, felt his stomach tighten. Tanaka's rigid code offered structure in chaos, but Watanabe's kindness during the rice pudding incident had been the first genuine human connection since capture. Now he was supposed to pretend that man didn't exist. The next morning, Nakayama found Watanabe in the library. Commander Whitmore would like to accept your offer. He's authorized 1 cooking lesson this afternoon. Private Sullivan will be your student. I'll translate. Mrs. Yamada will observe to ensure authenticity. And if I refuse, then nothing happens. But Sullivan was genuinely hurt last night. He truly wants to understand. This isn't about Sullivan's feelings. This is intelligence gathering. You want me to reveal information about Japanese supply conditions through food discussion. The blunt assessment caught Nakayama off guard. That may be part of it. But it's also true that Sullivan wants to learn. And teaching might give you something beyond contemplating your circumstances. Teaching the enemy. Teaching another human being about something you clearly care about. Watanabe stared at his hands. Lieutenant Tanaka will see this as collaboration. I'll be completely isolated. You're already isolated. You broke the silence last night. That bell can't be unrung. Watanabe saw the moment when rationalization won. One lesson. Ondashi. The foundation of Japanese cooking. Nothing more. But before the lesson, Tanaka made one final move. He positioned himself so their encounter appeared accidental. Corporal Watanabe, I understand you've agreed to provide cooking instruction to the Americans. One lesson. On basic technique. There is no such thing as basic collaboration. Every word you speak serves their intelligence gathering. I understand rice is more than intelligence data. It's culture, tradition, accumulated wisdom. If war destroys everything else, perhaps preserving that knowledge matters. You preserve nothing by teaching those who bomb our cities. You simply make yourself useful to the enemy, which is the definition of collaboration. And silence preserves what exactly? If we all die here without speaking, does that honor our culture? Or ensure that understanding dies with us? You speak like a coward searching for justification. Perhaps. Or perhaps like a man already betrayed by his own commanders who sees no honor and loyalty to those who stole from soldiers and blamed subordinates for their corruption. The reference to Ishikawa landed like a physical blow. Tanaka recovered quickly, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. You've made your choice, Corporal. Live with the consequences. But do not expect sympathy when other prisoners treat you as what you are, a collaborator who has abandoned honor for American approval. Watanabe stood alone in the hallway, knowing his next steps would define how he was remembered. But his hands had remembered who they were. And that memory was worth whatever price the future might demand. AR American equipment, commercial ranges, industrial refrigeration, stainless steel surfaces, but the smells were universal. Private Eddie Sullivan waited with nervous energy, his young face showing excitement mixed with embarrassment. Sergeant Nakayama stood ready to translate. And in the corner, an elderly Japanese woman arranged vegetables. Corporal Watanabe, she said in Japanese, her voice warm with grandmother gentleness. I'm Mrs. Helen Yamada. I've been asked to observe to ensure cultural authenticity. I hope my presence doesn't make you uncomfortable. Watanabe bowed respectfully. Your presence honors the lesson, Yamada-san. What Watanabe couldn't know was that Mrs. Yamada's mind was cataloging everything, his dialect, his posture, his class background. Beneath grandmother warmth ran the sharp analytical mind that made her one of the OSS's most effective cultural intelligence specialists. Sullivan stepped forward. Through Nakayama's translation. Corporal Watanabe, I want to apologize for last night. I really thought I was making something nice. I didn't mean to insult anyone. The earnestness was undeniable. You meant well, Watanabe said. That counts for something. But good intentions without understanding create confusion rather than comfort. Today, I'll teach you about dashi, the foundation of Japanese cooking. He moved to the preparation area where ingredients waited. Kombu kelp, dried bonito flakes, water. Basic components waiting to be transformed. In Japanese cooking, Watanabe began, his hands moving toward the kelp with automatic grace. We don't force flavors. We coax them. Dashi is about creating conditions where flavor offers itself willingly. He held up kombu, examining it in the light. His craftsman's eye noted quality and grade. Without thinking, because teaching had already begun to override caution, he added, This is good kelp. High grade. At the depot where I worked, we received kelp so old and low quality it barely flavored water. Sometimes we substituted dried sardines, but those were rationed too. Toward the end, we were using anything to create umami. Mrs. Yamada made a small note. In the observation room, Captain Shin's analysts were already processing intelligence. Japanese military supply depots receiving substandard ingredients. Substitutions being made. Resources constrained enough that basic flavoring agents were rationed. But Watanabe, lost in teaching pleasure, didn't notice the significance of his revelation. His attention focused on Sullivan's hands as the private carefully wiped the kelp with a damp cloth. Never wash kombu directly, Watanabe explained. The white powder on the surface contains flavor. We clean it gently, respectfully, preparing it for transformation. The lesson continued. Each careful explanation, each demonstrated technique, each casual mention of wartime shortages built the intelligence picture. But something else was happening too, something Dr. Sarah Weinstein documented with growing fascination and discomfort. Watanabe was healing. His shoulders straightened as he taught. His voice gained confidence discussing his craft. His hands moved with precision and grace of someone reclaiming identity. He was becoming himself again, stepping back into the craftsman role that military service had stripped away. Sullivan genuinely learned. His questions were thoughtful, his attention complete. When Watanabe demonstrated proper temperature for steeping kelp, hot but not boiling, patient but not prolonged, Sullivan practiced repeatedly until his hands understood. Nakayama translated with increasing emotional complexity. His own suppressed culinary training resurged in memory. He found himself offering clarifications, adding technical details that bridged the cultural gap. In doing so, he crossed his own line from neutral translator to active participant. Mrs. Yamada watched with practiced eyes, understanding that intelligence gathering and human connection weren't mutually exclusive. Yes, Watanabe was revealing supply information, but he was also teaching Sullivan to see Japanese culture as worthy of understanding rather than destruction. That might matter too, in ways transcending immediate military intelligence. When the lesson ended, when dashi had been properly prepared and tasted and declared successful, Watanabe felt something he hadn't experienced since capture: satisfaction. The simple, profound pleasure of work well done. Tomorrow, Sullivan asked through Nakayama, his face bright. Can we do another lesson tomorrow? Watanabe hesitated, awareness returning. One lesson had become the promise of more. Teaching had led to revelation. Out there, Lieutenant Tanaka waited with cold judgment. But his hands remembered good ingredients properly prepared. His craftsman's soul had tasted resurrection. The price of that resurrection suddenly seemed more bearable than the alternative of silence and slow spiritual death. Tomorrow, Watanabe agreed. We'll work on rice preparation. The foundation beneath the foundation. Walking back, he saw Seaman Kimura in the hallway. The young sailor's face showed conflict and something that might have been hope. Their eyes met. Then Kimura deliberately looked away, unable to defy Tanaka's isolation edict, but also unable to maintain required contempt. It was a small mercy in a situation devoid of larger ones. Watanabe had crossed the line from prisoner to collaborator. The path forward would be difficult, lonely, and morally complex. But his hands had remembered who they were, and that memory was worth whatever price the future might demand. Over the following weeks, cooking lessons expanded into routine. Watanabe taught rice preparation, vegetable cutting techniques, presentation art. Each lesson inadvertently revealed more intelligence. Explanations of why certain vegetables were unavailable, mentions of synthetic seasonings replacing real ones, descriptions of how supply depots prioritized ammunition over food. The kitchen became a haven where Watanabe, Sullivan, and Nakayama formed an unlikely bond, communicating through food when words failed. But prison social dynamics deteriorated. Tanaka had successfully isolated Watanabe among prisoners. Only Kimura still spoke with him, and even that friendship was strained. Other prisoners whispered "collaborator" when Watanabe passed. The psychological toll was evident. Nightmares worsened, and he questioned his choices constantly. One afternoon, Chaplain Robert Tanaka approached Watanabe in the library. The Nisei Buddhist chaplain's gentle presence was a contrast to Lieutenant Tanaka's rigid severity. "Corporal Watanabe," the chaplain said softly, "I've been watching you struggle with your choices. May I offer perspective?" Watanabe looked up, surprised. "I'm not sure perspective can ease what I'm doing." "Perhaps not ease, but reframe." The chaplain sat. "In Buddhist teaching, we speak of skillful action, choices made with awareness of suffering they might prevent or create. You're teaching cultural knowledge that might help Americans see Japanese people as human rather than abstract enemies. After war ends, that understanding might prevent future suffering. Is that not skillful action?" Lieutenant Tanaka would say it's betrayal. Lieutenant Tanaka defines honor through rigid codes that leave no room for complexity. But life is complex, Corporal. Loyalty to corrupt commanders who stole from soldiers. Is that honor? Or is honor found in preserving culture, in building understanding, in choosing the most compassionate path available in impossible circumstances? The words offered fragile comfort, but comfort nonetheless. Watanabe found himself returning to them during subsequent lessons, using them to shore up his rationalizations. Meanwhile, Captain Chen's guilt grew as she read Dr. Weinstein's documentation. The psychologist's reports made uncomfortable reading. Subject displays genuine healing through cooking instruction, but remains unaware that intelligence derived from his lessons has contributed to successful targeting of Japanese supply convoys. The ethical complexity of providing therapeutic benefit while exploiting trauma for military advantage cannot be overstated. Chen found herself in Weinstein's office late one evening. "You think what we're doing is wrong. I think what we're doing is necessary and wrong simultaneously," Weinstein replied. "That's the nature of war. It doesn't absolve us of responsibility for the harm we cause, even when that harm serves larger purposes. He's healing, though. You said so yourself. He's healing because he doesn't know the full scope of how his information is being used. That's not genuine healing, Captain. That's healing built on incomplete knowledge. What happens when he discovers the truth?" Chen had no answer. In the prisoner's quarters, Kimura faced increasing pressure. One evening, Lieutenant Tanaka cornered him. "You still speak with Watanabe. This must stop. He's kind to me," Kimura said quietly. "He treats me with respect when others see only a frightened boy. He's a collaborator who poisons you with his rationalization. You must choose. Maintain this friendship and become outcast yourself, or demonstrate proper loyalty to your fellow prisoners." Kimura spent a sleepless night wrestling with the choice. By morning, he had decided. He found Watanabe in the kitchen during a lesson and asked, through Nakayama, if he could assist sometimes. The request stunned everyone. Sullivan looked uncertain. Nakayama appeared concerned about the implications. But Watanabe's face showed profound gratitude mixed with guilt. "You understand what this means?" Watanabe asked in Japanese. "Tanaka will treat you as he treats me." "I understand," Kimura replied. "But I'm tired of choosing between honor codes that feel wrong and human connections that feel right." "You've taught me something important," Watanabe-san. "Sometimes the most honorable thing is simply to be kind." Mrs. Yamada, observing from her corner, felt unexpected emotion. Her intelligence reports that week included more than supply data. She wrote, "The operation is producing unintended consequence. Genuine cross-cultural bonds forming that may have long-term strategic value beyond immediate intelligence gathering. Recommend careful observation of these developing relationships." Commander Whitmore, reviewing reports of successful supply convoy interdictions, grudgingly approved continued lessons. The intelligence was proving invaluable, but he remained uncomfortable with the human cost, even if he couldn't quite articulate why. Watanabe taught with increasing openness, his lessons expanding to include cultural philosophy alongside technique. He explained the concept of madanai, regret over waste, which inadvertently revealed how desperately Japanese forces struggled with supply shortages. He discussed seasonal ingredients, revealing which regions faced the worst agricultural disruptions. Each revelation saved American lives. Each revelation also deepened the moral complexity of an operation that had started as simple psychological manipulation and evolved into something approaching genuine cultural exchange. The line between exploitation and understanding grew increasingly blurred, until no one involved could quite identify where one ended and the other began. During a particularly detailed lesson on military field rations, something shifted in Watanabe. He was explaining the challenges of feeding troops with inadequate supplies, and his voice took on an edge that Sullivan noticed even without understanding Japanese. "The problem wasn't just enemy action," Watanabe said, his hands stilling over the vegetables he'd been cutting. "The problem was corruption. My commanding officer, Colonel Ishikawa, he embezzled premium goods meant for soldiers, sold them on black markets while troops starved on moldy rice." Nakayama's translation faltered. He hadn't expected this confession. Sullivan stopped cooking entirely, sensing the emotional shift. "I reported it," Watanabe continued, his voice breaking slightly. "I documented everything. Requisition forms showing deliveries that never reached us. Inventories that didn't match actual supplies. I gave it all to the Inspector General's office." He laughed bitterly. "They ignored me. I was just a cook, and Ishikawa was connected. When the depot's failures became undeniable, he blamed me in official reports. Called me incompetent. Said I had mismanaged supplies. The words poured out now, a dam breaking. I tried to feed hundreds of men with nothing. Stretched rations that were already insufficient. Used every technique I knew to make spoiled ingredients edible. And Ishikawa took credit when things worked and blamed me when they didn't." Sullivan, understanding only the emotion but not the words, moved closer. Nakayama struggled to translate the confession, his own voice thick with unexpected emotion. The bombing, Watanabe said quietly. Part of me was relieved. Not about the men who died. That will haunt me forever. But relieved that I wouldn't have to watch more soldiers starve while Ishikawa grew fat. Relieved that someone might finally see the truth. He looked at his hands. These hands were trained to create beauty from ingredients, to honor food through preparation. Instead, I spent 2 years trying to make garbage edible while being blamed for failures that weren't mine. So when you ask why I'm willing to teach you, Sullivan-san, it's because I realized something. My loyalty was never to Ishikawa or to commanders like him. My loyalty was to an ideal that they betrayed long before America captured me. In the observation room, Captain Chin watched through one-way glass, tears streaming down her face. Commander Whitmore stood beside her, his expression unreadable. Jesus Christ, Whitmore muttered. We're not interrogating an enemy. We're exploiting a victim. Chin wiped her eyes. The intelligence is valid regardless of circumstances. His descriptions of supply corruption confirm patterns we've suspected. This could help us understand the full scope of Japanese logistical collapse. You actually believe that justifies what we're doing? I believe we're at war, and war requires impossible choices. That's not an answer, Captain. No, sir. It's not. Later that evening, Dr. Weinstein found Chun in her office. You need to stop the program, Weinstein said without preamble. Watanabe is experiencing genuine trauma processing. Using his emotional breakthrough for intelligence purposes crosses every ethical line. He volunteered the information. We didn't force it out of him. You created an environment specifically designed to lower his psychological defenses. That's manipulation, no matter how gentle the methods. What would you have me do, Doctor? Tell Commander Whitmore we're stopping an operation that's providing crucial intelligence because we feel guilty about the methods. I'd have you acknowledge what we're doing to that man. Acknowledge that our most successful intelligence operation is built on exploiting someone who's already been victimized by his own system. Chin had no response. That night, she wrote a classified memo documenting the ethical complexities of the operation. She didn't know if anyone would read it, but she needed to create a record of the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the most effective intelligence came from the most morally compromised sources. Chaplain Tanaka visited Watanabe after the emotional session. They sat in the library, and the chaplain offered perspective rooted in Buddhist concepts of compassion and suffering. You've been carrying this burden alone for so long, the chaplain said. Telling the truth, even to your captors, can be a form of liberation, or a form of betrayal. Perhaps both. But consider, if the truth reveals corruption that harmed Japanese soldiers, isn't there honor in ensuring that truth is known, even if enemies hear it first? Mrs. Yamada's intelligence report that week was extensive. She detailed not just the supply corruption Watanabe described, but the broader implications. If a supply depot operated with such dysfunction, how many others face similar problems? Her analysis suggested systematic logistics failure across Japanese military operations. The intelligence proved prophetic. American forces used insights derived from Watanabe's confession to target supply networks with devastating effectiveness. Thousands of Japanese soldiers suffered increased hardship as their already strained logistics collapsed further. Watanabe remained unaware of the real-world impact of his words. He knew he was providing intelligence, had made peace with that reality. But he didn't know the specific consequences, didn't understand how his intimate knowledge of supply depot corruption was being weaponized against his homeland. That ignorance was a mercy neither Chun nor Weinstein could bring themselves to disturb. Lieutenant Tanaka's confrontation came in the prisoner's common area, deliberately public, to ensure maximum impact. He positioned himself to block Watanabe's path, his body language radiating contained fury. Corporal Watanabe, Tanaka said, his voice carrying across the room. I understand you've been quite forthcoming with our captors, sharing details about depot operations, discussing supply failures, confessing corruption among our officers. Watanabe met his gaze steadily. I've been teaching cooking, Lieutenant. Nothing more. Don't insult my intelligence. Every word you speak is intelligence gathering. Every technique you demonstrate reveals our military's weaknesses. You've become exactly what I predicted, a collaborator who hides behind cultural preservation to justify treason. And what do you hide behind, Lieutenant? Honor codes that make cruelty virtuous? Pride that values silence over truth. The challenge drew sharp intakes of breath from watching prisoners. No one spoke to Tanaka this way. "You dare," Tanaka began. But Seaman Kimura interrupted, his young voice shaking but determined. "Watanabe-san isn't hiding behind anything. He's trying to preserve culture while we're trapped in impossible circumstances. There's honor in that too, isn't there?" Tanaka's gaze swung to Kimura with contempt. "So the boy has been corrupted as well. How predictable." "I'm not corrupted," Kimura said. "I'm just tired of pretending that rigid honor codes matter more than human decency." The confrontation escalated until guards intervened, separating the men before physical violence erupted. But the damage was done. Watanabe saw in Tanaka's eyes not just contempt, but something deeper, fear that his rigid worldview couldn't accommodate the complexity of what Watanabe represented. That same day, Commander Whitmore called Chin to his office. "Washington wants to expand the program. They want Watanabe teaching multiple American cooks. They want a full Japanese kitchen established. The intelligence has been too valuable." Watanabe suffers a severe breakdown after Whitmore expands the program despite Chin's warnings. Chaplain Tanaka provides crisis intervention, reframing his choices through Buddhist concepts. The next morning, Watanabe demands transparency. He'll continue teaching only if told how his intelligence is used. Nakayama admits it informs targeting decisions that harm Japanese forces. Watanabe accepts this consciously, believing exposing corruption ultimately serves Japan by revealing the regime's failures. His conscious collaboration transforms the operations dynamic. Sullivan learns the truth about intelligence gathering but continues, valuing his genuine cultural education. Mrs. Yamada reveals her son fights in the 442nd while family was interned, offering perspective on impossible loyalties. The expanded program proceeds with Watanabe teaching cultural philosophy alongside technique, Ichigo, Ichii, seasonality, mindfulness. Lieutenant Tanaka retreats into isolation as his rigid worldview crumbles. By summer 1945, the kitchen becomes sanctuary. News arrives of Kyoto bombings near Watanabe's uncle's restaurant. Sullivan and Americans comfort the grieving corporal. Their compassion witnessed by Lieutenant Tanaka shatters his certainty about American barbarity. Japan's surrender brings complex relief. Watanabe prepares a farewell kaiseki feast. Tanaka admits envying Watanabe's ability to find purpose beyond shame. Sullivan presents proper Japanese rice dessert. Watanabe judges it almost perfect, like their entire morally ambiguous endeavor. Repatriation comes with protection letters. The story ends with Watanabe sailing home, carrying recipes and understanding that culture survived war, that human connection persisted despite circumstances designed to prevent it. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.